Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are hangingontohope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given. Hello, everyone. This is Karen B. Thanks for tuning into the Hanging On to Hope podcast. Today, we welcome back one of our favorite guests, Sheila Wray Gregoire.
Yeah, you did it.
Congratulations, Karen. I mess up so many people's names. And we were talking about her new book, The Marriage You Want. This book was written by Sheila and her husband, Keith. Sheila is the face behind BearMarriage.com, as well as speaker and award-winning author of 9 books, including The Great Sex Rescue and She Deserves Better and others. Sheila is passionate about changing the evangelical conversation about sex and marriage to make it healthy, evidence-based, and biblical. So welcome back to the show, Sheila.
Thank you. It's good to be here again.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're with us. So we talked with you previously about The Great Sex Rescue, which I highly recommend. That was a great book. We also talked to you about She Deserves Better.
She Deserves Better.
She Deserves Better. And then The Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex. Those are the 3 podcasts we've already done. So we've already talked about the many evangelical marriage books, which I would not recommend and can make things worse, like Love and Respect and other books. So I consider this a very important matter. And this also was very timely because I just got married in May.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So as I read through the book, I was telling my husband, I'm like, we're doing really good. Because a lot of things you recommended, like going to bed at the same time. I'm like, oh, we do that. So anyway, it was really encouraging for me. And I just liked all the research. So the book opens with a powerful visual of a triangle representing marriage, which a lot of us have seen, with God at the top. How has your understanding of this metaphor evolved since your own premarital counseling, which you talk about in the book?
Yeah. So when Keith and I were getting married, almost 34 years ago now, the pastor drew the triangle, God is at the top and then we're each on our own corners at the bottom. And the point was supposed to be that as you move closer, to God, you end up moving closer to each other. And so this is all very beautiful and it's all very wonderful. But I think that the triangle can get taken out of shape in a number of different ways that we don't always realize. And, one of the really big ones that I think we see in the evangelical church is that we end up, instead of trying to be authentically me, showing up with everything that God made me to be, with my giftings, with my passions, with my interests, we try to become like the biblical man and the biblical woman. So we're running after a stereotype instead of running after who we actually are. And that just doesn't work because people aren't stereotypes. Right. And yet we're told all the time, men are like this and women are like this. Right. Yeah. And it's simply not true.
Right. Yeah.
It's good. Like, let me just do some math for you. I love math. And so just give me some grace if you don't. But we're often told that women are emotional and men are logical, right? That women are feelers and men are thinkers. And no one ever gives you any stats for this. So when Keith and I were writing this book, we thought, well, let's just measure it, because the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs Personality Type Inventory, they actually measure people based on whether they're feelers or thinkers. And we found a study of 60,000 people and we took a look at it. And sure enough, like 56% of men are thinkers. So that does go along with the stereotype that more men are thinkers, right? Mm-hmm. And about 73% of women are feelers. So that even more fits the stereotype. But if you remember back to middle school math, how do you tell the chance that both of those things are going to happen at the same time? You multiply them together. Okay. So 56% times 73%. And I might have some of these stats like slightly wrong. I don't remember them exactly, but I think you get something like 42%. So that means that every single sermon that you have ever heard about how men are thinkers and women are feelers does not apply to 58% of couples in the congregation.
Wow.
And yet we're told this all the time, right? And so much of our advice in the Christian church is like that men are like this and women are like this.
Yeah. It's like pigeonholed. You're like pigeonholed.
Yeah, I hear that a lot too. I think I used to think that way a lot more too in the past, but now after listen to you. All your surveys, and I'm a numbers person too, so.
Yeah, like there's nothing wrong with fitting a stereotype. Like that's perfectly fine. But the point is you need to authentically be who God made you to be.
Right.
And if that's who God made you to be, that's great. But for so many people, it's not. And we feel like there's something wrong with us when we don't fit a stereotype, or we run after a stereotype when that's just not who we are.
Yeah.
So welcome back to the show. In chapter 1, you talk about people that may be in abusive relationships and how they often don't realize it because one of the characteristics of abuse is that it is very confusing. You say often, the abusive spouse tells you that you are the problem and you need to fix it. And too often our church mantra confirms it. You say that the triangle paints a lovely picture of marriage in which two people matter and God is the center. But remember that you're responsible only for your part of the triangle. No matter how frantically you move along your side of the triangle, you can't change their position or direction. Only they can decide what they will do or not do. No matter how much we pray, love, give, or sacrifice, people can choose addiction, abuse, and affairs. And if your spouse does this, that is not on you. All of these things break the covenant of marriage through abandonment. That is not in most Christian marriage books. I, for one, thank you and your husband for writing this book. Anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, this was something that we were really passionate about, because what I have seen over and over and over again in Christian marriage books is that they'll have an abuse disclaimer, right? They'll say something like, now, if you're being abused, you don't need to put up with that. Please get yourself to safety. Okay. Most books say that. Even Love and Respect says that. But then in the very next paragraph, he tells a story of a man who was kicked out of the house for physically abusing his wife, who repented and so was allowed back in the house. And the solution is now for her to learn how to unconditionally respect him and not to provoke his anger. And so if you give a disclaimer about abuse, but your anecdotes actually have abusive dynamics that you don't say are abuse, then you're teaching people not to recognize abuse. And that's what so many of our Christian resources do, is they have anecdotes that are abusive in nature, anecdotes that have coercive sex in them, anecdotes that are describing, a man raging at his wife. They're describing verbal abuse, but they're not naming it as such. And because they have a disclaimer somewhere in the book, now obviously this doesn't apply for abusive relationships, then it's really confusing for people. Yeah. And I mean, you both know this, right? When you're in the midst of abuse and you're in the church, what do you do when you're confused? You go and you buy books and you read them, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's what I did.
Yeah.
You read tons and tons of them, especially Power of a Praying Wife, which promises that if you just pray hard enough, your husband will change, right? Like you need to, yeah. And so I think what we need to understand is that probably at least a third, if not a half, of people reading evangelical marriage books are abuse victims.
Yeah.
Yeah. I used to go to that book all the time. I had it underlined.
I did too.
Had it, marked on the ones that I really need to pray, and all of those books. And I just did we did premarital counseling before we got married, and it was a couple that was younger than us, but they had a list of premarital books recommended reading. And a lot of the books on there where I was like looking at it right and going, this is going to be a problem. I could just feel like, and I ended up talking to them about it, and they didn't take it off the list. But when they both talked about it as a couple, like Love and Respect for one, they did make the caveat of like, if a man has abusive tendencies, then he is going to probably use this book, against you. So use it with caution, but I thought I wouldn't even put that book on there. And I explained to them why, because in my previous marriage, it made it worse, But yeah, those kind of things, when I see those books on there, that's why I'm glad that you have a marriage book. So like my son is getting married, and I would like to get him your book, not something that's going to, not that he's got abusive tendencies, but it's just not a book I could ever recommend.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. And books should not do harm. It is absolutely possible to write a book that doesn't do harm. Yeah. The Marriage You Want, our new book, will not harm anyone. The Great Sex Rescue will not harm anyone. And yet so many of our evangelical best-selling sex and marriage books do harm because they teach an authoritarian view of marriage, where the husband is an authority over the wife and where sex is a male entitlement and a female obligation. And if those are the underlying foundational beliefs that these books are teaching, they can't help but do harm, even if the authors are trying to soften it. And that's just a huge problem. And so we know that when women are in abusive marriages, they're going to books more. Right. And so women are flocking to these books that are actually making things worse. And so one thing that we really tried to do is in each chapter of The Marriage You Want, we tried to say, hey, look, if your marriage looks like X, Y, or Z, you are likely being abused. We're trying to tell people over and over again, this isn't normal. You should not be putting up with this. This isn't good. You need to get to safety. And so that was just a theme that we had over and over again.
Yeah. And I'm thankful for that, because I couldn't recommend any of those other books for sure. Mm-hmm. So in the book, you challenge the idea that there's only one way to be a biblical man or woman. How do you respond to those who believe traditional gender roles are scripturally mandated?
They're just not they're just not. I mean, what is a biblical woman? Is it someone who puts a tent peg through her enemy's head? Is it someone who defies their husband and goes and advocates for her employees to the local chieftain to make sure that no one gets killed? Is it someone who preaches and teaches men while her husband tags along? Like, the examples of actual biblical women do not line up with our idea of biblical womanhood. I don't know any woman in the Bible who lines up with our idea of biblical womanhood. And there is no woman in the New Testament who is ever praised for her domestic duties.
Right. Or how much she submits.
No. And that doesn't mean that domestic duties aren't important, or that the things that we do to care for our families aren't important. It's just, that is not the main point of life. Our main point of life is glorifying Jesus, and no matter where we are at. Right. And it isn't like, women do that simply by doing the dishes and caring for the children. And so it just isn't there, this idea of biblical manhood and womanhood. And what we found in our survey over and over again is that couples who see each other as partners rather than as, he is my spiritual leader, those couples do really well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, because another book that I read several times was The Excellent Wife, which is not a book I would recommend either. It's a book I threw across the room. I got several times.
And a lot of the books that we're mentioning, like Excellent Wife, Love and Respect, Power of a Parent Wife, at baremarriage.com, we actually have one sheets that you can download with all of the problems with these books and with quotes and page numbers of all the problematic elements. So if you just go to baremarriage.com and you click on resources, our one sheets will come up and you can see them. I think we did The Excellent Wife is probably one of the more recent ones. So
that's great.
Good. I read The Power of a Praying Wife too. And I think until you understand abuse more, you can pray and go, oh, wow, it's working, because at least my ex-husband, he would change long enough, like for sometimes it'd be a year or so, as far as like gambling or certain sin he had. So I would think, oh, all my prayers working. I could see how it could be a little bit deceiving in that way too. But anyway, the concept of overlapping bell curves features prominently in your discussion of gender differences. How does the scientific framework help couples understand their unique dynamics?
Yeah, so overlapping bell curves just means that with the trait in the population that exists on a curve. So some things don't. You either have brown eyes or you have green eyes or you have, blue eyes, right? Like some things you're either that or you're this. Yeah. But some things are like on a curve, like how high a libido do you have? Are you visual? How emotional are you? Those things exist on a curve. And the thing is that the curves for men and women overlap. And so let's think about this in terms of height, because height's really easy to understand. My great-grandmother was 5'11". My great-grandfather was 5'7". And yet they didn't have scientists banging on their door saying, how is this possible that she is taller than him? Because we all understand that while men as a whole are taller than women as a whole, that doesn't mean that every man is taller than every woman.
Right. Yeah.
And in the same way, men may feel a more felt need for sex, but that doesn't mean that every man has a higher libido than every woman. And so there is a lot of overlap. And in fact, there is more differences between men and between women than there is between the average man and the average woman for most of these things. And so to treat us like we're completely different species is bizarre, and it's just simply not true.
Yeah. It's good to point that out. Yeah. So you said that the thing that kills marriage faster than anything is entitlement. I like that you even include a quiz you can take to see if you have some entitlement going on. And before I ask the question on that, I like that you talk at the end of the chapter about how feeling entitled can lead to wanting to be in control in the relationship and to one's spouse. You say when some people don't feel in control or when they experience vulnerability, they feel as if their spouse is actively or deliberately hurting them. They can build up narratives in their minds about control. Control may look like constant criticism, the silent treatment, violence, withholding money, punishing the children, cutting a spouse off from friends and family, or withholding any kind of positive interaction. And I wanted to quote that point since many of our listeners are in abusive or destructive relationships. I think that's really important. So in regards to the entitlement, how does entitlement relate to the concept of foundations versus frills?
Right. So in any marriage, there are some things that we absolutely need to survive. And then there are some things that, once you have those things, we can start wondering, well, what is it that I actually want? So Abraham Maslow was a psychologist, and he came up with this idea of the hierarchy of needs, which exist on a pyramid. And the needs at the bottom are the things that you just need to survive, right? Food, air, water, shelter, safety. And once those are taken care of, then you can meet some of the higher needs like friendship, like hobbies, and then your highest needs like self-actualization, feeling like I have a purpose in life. And marriage has a similar flow where there are some things that just need to be done. You need the laundry done. You need the rent paid. You need the dinner made. You need the kids' homework done and the kids getting off to school in the morning. And then there's like, I need to find a church I love. I need to figure out what kind of job I want. And then there's feeling like you're meeting your calling. And what often happens in a marriage is that the wife is down there on that bottom tier, barely surviving, while the husband is pursuing his calling or pursuing something wonderful in his life. And he feels like if my wife asks anything of me, she's taking something from me, instead of realizing that, hold on a second, she's doing things and I am using her at her expense. I am pushing her down because I am sort of standing on top of her to get to where I want to go. And so an example of that, and I hear these sort of stories all the time, is, a woman super busy with the kids. She's also holding down a full-time job. Her husband doesn't really help a lot at home. They're getting really distant. And then he confesses to her that he's been watching porn their whole marriage. And she's devastated. Sex disappears off the radar because she's just too traumatized and feels betrayed. And now he gets really mad because she's cut him off of sex. And he's like, you need to give me more sex. But meanwhile, he's not helping with the children. He's completely disengaged from any kind of emotional connection. And so he feels hard done by because she is taking away his greatest need for sex, but she has more foundational needs that aren't being met. And this is what often happens is that couples feel like, okay, I have this need and you have this need. So if we just meet each other's needs, we'll be great. But that doesn't work if one of you is needing something foundational and one of you is needing something that's just a frill. You need to care for the foundational stuff first.
That's good.
And a lot of men are not caring for the foundational stuff. And then they're worried that they're not getting their frills.
Yeah. And they're probably quoting that verse, your body belongs to me or something similar that makes them feel like, oh, well, it says in the Bible. So, they're being manipulated that way.
Well,
So,
yeah, that seems like a much healthier approach to me than some of the other books that are out there and explaining the way you explain that. I like that.
I know. I wish your book was around when I was reading all these books, because
yeah, definitely.
all the other books I read just made it worse.
And I don't think I realized any of this when I read all those other books that, I was in a marriage where the person had a huge sense of entitlement. But until I got out, I'm like, oh, it was the entitlement.
Yep.
I just felt that huge sense of entitlement in every area. So, and then it trickled down to the kid, expecting that from the kids too in the later years. So here's a rather controversial way that you open a chapter. You shouldn't prioritize sex in your marriage. What do you mean?
Yeah, we're always told that, right? Prioritize sex. You got to prioritize sex. And what they mean by that is what? What do they mean when people say you got to prioritize sex?
Make sure that that's happening.
Right? You got to do it more, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But here's the problem. Having intercourse alone does not mean your marriage is going to be great. I mean, 16% of women report that their primary emotion after sex is feeling used. Right? For them, they would feel closer to their husbands if they didn't have sex. We have a 47-point orgasm gap in the evangelical church, by which we mean that 95% of men almost always reach orgasm in a given sexual encounter compared to just 48% of women. So men are experiencing very different sex than women are. So if she doesn't want sex, and it often is her that doesn't want sex, it can be him too. In 19% of marriages, she has the higher libido. But often in abusive marriages, which is what we're talking about, or what your podcast is talking about, it's often her that has the lower libido. And what I want people to understand is that libido is a symptom. It is not the problem. When women have a low libido, there's usually a reason. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to list 5 things, okay? So when there's high marital satisfaction, when she frequently reaches orgasm during sex, when they feel emotionally connected during sex, when there's no porn use in the marriage, and when there's no sexual dysfunction, her libido pretty much takes care of itself. So if she isn't wanting sex, there's a reason. So instead of prioritizing sex, instead of telling people just have more sex, let's prioritize the ingredients of great sex. So let's make sure that they're emotionally connected outside the bedroom. Let's make sure that sex feels humanizing to her and not dehumanizing. Let's make sure it's pleasurable for her. Let's make sure that all of those things are taken care of. And then we can start talking about the frequency of sex.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I like how you talk about how women have different arousal ways of getting aroused than men. I mean, men, it's pretty instant. Mm-hmm. Women, it's a little different. So I like how you broke that down too.
Yeah. I had a guy say to me once, well, sex is always good. Like, it was just in conversation. It was just a friend. And I was like, no, that's not true. Because I can't remember it ever. It depends on for a woman, it depends on who it is. And I was with an abusive person that expected they were entitled. So it was more about pleasing them and not about me at all.
Yeah.
So, right. Especially as you were talking about the foundation versus frills, like if she's busy, and raising kids or homeschooling or whatever it is, there's a lot to do as a woman. And then to have that added to her to-do list instead of like how you explained it, that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
We tend to think that the biggest problems in marriage are sex and money, but you found that there was something that dwarfed both of those. What is that?
Yeah. So we measured marital satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 100, and most people fell within 60 to 90. Okay. So for this particular survey, we had people who were still married. For our survey for the Great Sex, we had quite a number of divorced people. So we could look at how messages really hurt marriages. So for our current study for The Marriage You Want, we had in general, we had happier couples. Okay. So most people are between 60 to 90. And when you have money problems, you see a decrease in marital satisfaction of about 5 points, which is quite significant. When you go from having sex several times a week to once a month, you see a decrease of 10 points. Okay. So again, that's significant, more than money. But when you go from doing 50% of the housework to 90% of the housework, we see a drop of 30 points.
Wow.
Like that is huge. And that applies even if she's a stay-at-home mom.
Wow.
So, and it's huge both ways, because sometimes it was men who were doing almost all of it, but in those cases, often it was because of a health problem of the woman. Yeah. And it was far, far more likely. I think it was 6 times more likely that it would be a woman doing the vast majority of it. And when that happens, marital satisfaction just falls through the floor.
Yeah. Wow.
And yet we never talk about this. Instead, like books like His Needs, Her Needs, or Jimmy Evans' book, Marriage on the Rock, they literally say that God gave men a need for domestic support. So God created men to need women to do the housework, essentially.
That's crazy.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, after we did the Eden podcast, and I think you did one with them too. And, we know the truth about what it says. We know that's not the case. So can you explain the unfairness threshold and the different ways it shows up in marriage?
Yeah. So
to be continued. Stay tuned for next week's part 2. You don't want to miss it.
Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening, and until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.